I finished primary school, I went to board at New Plymouth Girls High School in New Plymouth for about 4 years, and during that time I think hockey was my main interest. And then I'd come home at the end of the term. We weren't allowed home terribly many weekends, and I remember sometimes coming home I'd bring some girlfriends with me, and when Mum and Dad used to go and play cards at the Menzies place, I'd bring the girlfriends there. Duncan was very interested in some of them. Yeah, and then a little bit later on, I think after school, or towards the end of school, what was it? Duncan had a vehicle at that stage, so he used to sometimes take me and his friend Alan Finer, who was working in the farm next door to the dancers in Stratford. And if I had girlfriends with me, they were sort of very welcome too. Yes.
Now tell me, coming from Mangamingi to the high school, all those, hundreds of girls, I suppose, in the whole school, how did you sort of, wow, look at all these people?
Go from 20 to 1,200.
It was a bit overwhelming really, because I didn't know anybody else there either. I think I was probably, a little bit homesick, missed the animals and that at home. As towards the end of the third and fourth year, I got into the hockey team, and that gave me, something outside to do. That's what I really missed most of all, is not being able to sort of have the freedom to sort of wander at will outside. And during that time at Mangamingi, every so often they had local dances too. That lady, I think a Mrs. Sate, used to come out and play the piano there. And they were always very well attended. After I left high school, I went on to Teachers College in Palmerston North for a couple of years, and then I came back to teach at Eltham, and my parents had arranged for me to board with Noel's mum, with Noel and Don and Gwen Body, which I did for 1 year. Then the next couple of years, my flatmates from Palmerston North had all gathered round to teach locally, so we got a flat in Eltham, which if you see it now you wouldn't imagine us living there. Then off I went overseas on my OE for a couple of years, and then came back and boarded with Mrs. Body again while I took up a teaching position at Mangatoki School. In the meantime, my brother Peter brought his, or a friend of mine, Sandy, to my 21st at Mangamingi. Had got married there too. Peter and Sandy got married just before I went back to Mangatoki, because for a little while Don and Carol and I worked at Ashley Lodge, the only licensed restaurant at that stage between Wanganui and New Plymouth, for a very sort of volatile red-headed lady by the name of Mary Kidd. But it was a lot of fun. Hard work, you didn't want to make the same mistake twice, but we really enjoyed it. Anyway, at Peter and Sandy's wedding, Colin was there as a groomsman. And about 6 months later or something, we got married and went to live at Pukinahu and milk cows for a few years. And then we moved over here, and we've been here since 1972.
When the pony arrived, I was considerably older than these guys, and so the pony was being a bit of a ratbag, so I got given the job of trying to take the life out of him a little bit. And I remember on one occasion, you and I were on him, and whoever did the saddle up didn't do it very tight, and we finished up riding, hanging upside down under the bloody thing. But yeah, he was a ratbag, but he was an honest little ratbag.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So with that photo of the boat, there was 3 different years. We watched the progress of Duncan's dad, Joe Menzies, getting the framework up and then getting the boat together, and then we had 3 different holidays, I think. One at Tauranga. We didn't catch very many fish, that I can remember. One at car fair and one at Raglan. Fishing wasn't wonderful, but you know, and going out in the boat was exciting.
Did you meet Jack Tarfey?
Yes, he at
was
the
off
Mount, wasn't it?
Matakana Island.
Yeah.
He was a Maori man that loved to go fishing. He would meet up with Mum and Dad and Bess and Eric, and he'd take them to a fishing spot where he knew you might catch a fish. He'd get up in the morning, milk his cows, and be waiting down at the jetty for us to go fishing with him. He was a nice guy.
Just one other interesting little bit. When I first started school, there was a girl there called Barbara Yates, and I think they lived right up at Amona. I think their father might have been a roadman or something. But it was years and years later that we happened to meet up, of all places, at Tapeka, which is just out from Russell. And this chap, Jim Mowat, had married this Barbara Yates, and while he was courting, and that he'd had a bit to do with Jim the Hermit that used to live out there.
He, as I understand it, was a professor at Otago University, but he had a problem with alcohol, and eventually he got out of Otago University and he came and worked the freezing works at Patea, and then he got to the point where that wasn't doing him any good either, because the booze was still available, and so he then decided that he'd put a caravan on top of the Amona Saddle and he'd live there, and he'd make enough money in 3 months at the freezing works that he could live on that from there on. Anyway, the caravan had been up there for 2 or 3 years, and then the bloody hoons one night wrecked his caravan and completely messed things up. So he thought, by then he knew his way around that piece of backcountry. So he went and took his gear and walked into what we would say was Nairns. It was where Nairns were pre-1920. And the house was still there. So Jim went down and domiciled in the house. And he didn't need people, he just wanted to be on his own. Anyway, pig hunters and others used to share with him occasionally, but one stage, somebody set fire to the goddamn thing, and so he moved out again. And he went probably 10 miles from the end of the road, or 9 to 10 miles from the end of the road, into Irons's. And he stayed in there. He must have had some form of income, because at that stage he wasn't going to the works, but he still had a little bit of money, so I don't exactly know how that happened.
I think he used to send out possum skins.
Yeah, you could be right. Yep, well done. Anyway, from Irons's, he looked after himself, and then he got himself interested. Funny thing, he'd made a garden for himself, and he had to compete with all the pests, plus goats, plus possums, plus wild cattle, and no fencing. So he made like a moat, but it was a dry moat. It grew grass, but it was down and up and over the hump, and believe it or not, it kept everything out of his garden.
Yeah.
Kept the wild cattle out, it kept the goats out, and the possums. So it worked brilliantly. But he had D-cell batteries stood on end that made a path from here to that cattle stop, out to his garden. And he would have been able to tell you, everybody that played cricket for New Zealand, what their batting average was, what their bowling average was, what the best score was. He was a mine of information if you wanted to know about cricket. But he also knew how to find his way around the back country. And so then the next thing that happened was he caught up with Alan Beck at Beck Helicopters. And so Alan would fly by he'd have a look, do a lap. And if Jim needed something, he'd rush outside and Alan would put down and they'd do business and he'd carry on. And then a little while later, Alan got the job of flying him a brand new piano into this hut. And so, that went in and so on. That was all fine. I don't imagine it was very well tuned after it had flown under a helicopter for a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes. But anyway, it was there. And we got called on to take Hazel Jenkins.
Yeah.
And Hazel's family were out beyond Merle. Muley's and Jenkins is down over that gully. But Hazel was very good friends with the girl Irons. And the bit of a sad story for that was that the girl Irons rode out from their place to come out to Eltham, which would be a full day's ride on a good horse. But the horse spooked somewhere coming up the river and both went over the side and the girl was killed. It's a bit sad, but it happens. So anyway, Hazel wanted, in her last few years, she wanted to be taken in to see where her friend had died and to go and see Jim into Irons's hut. And as I say, it was 9 or 10 miles, so it was a long walk for an elderly lady who had a twisted foot. And we took a party of about 8 or 9 people with us. No, it wouldn't be that many, probably 5 or 6 people. But anyway, I remember we unpacked all the packs out of the old Land Rover at the top of the road and issued them, them around with people. Got to Hazel's pack. So I got someone to carefully take Hazel away for a walk somewhere out of sight for a few minutes, and we, bit for you. And, we got it down to a pack where she felt she was important, but she was carrying a fifth of what she started off carrying.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got there and we broached the hill. You had to climb up quite a big ridge to go over the top to Irons' hut. And without anybody knowing anything, when she broached the hill, Jim was playing the piano. It was absolutely mind-blowing. The excitement on her face was brilliant. So, we went down there. We spent the latter part of the afternoon there, and then everyone bunked there for the night. And Grant Smith, lawyer from town, he shared a tent with Hazel. And in the night, he's ferreting around. And the rats were under the tent, the floor of the tent, and they're scruffing around underneath people. And here he was trying desperately to dong them on the head and not disturb Hazel. It was hilariously funny, really, in hindsight. So that was okay. Jim, next morning, because it was my responsibility to get people in and out, I said to Jim, we want to go over to Rata Flat and out to Merle's. So can you show me which ridge to go along? And he said, how old's the lady? I said, I don't know. She's got to be, 73, maybe. Oh, he said, I can't take you. He wasn't going to be shown up by a lady that might be older than him. He wasn't going to walk out and show us where to go. Anyway, I got a little bit of skullduggery in the system, and I mucked her out and found out that she was only 69. She wasn't, but that was near enough. And so I told Jim, oh, well, that's all right. He said, so I'll take you. So next morning we took off, and then the old bugger got us lost anyway. But we got to the point where I knew where I was going. and we said farewell to Jim. And because of his isolation and so on, we thought it would be nice. So I'd made a little whiskey flask of whiskey, and when we left, we'd given him this bottle of whiskey, and we had to go through a saddle and up the hill and away. And from up on top of the hill on the other side, we could see Jim still sitting where we'd left him. He hadn't finished the whiskey yet, so he couldn't go home. He was an absolute bloody character. Eventually, he had to go to a rest home in New Plymouth, where he probably lasted a week at the most. He just couldn't handle being in that situation. So he did the kindest thing he could for himself and left town. So some weeks later, Alan and I got together and went in and loaded the pianos under the helicopter and brought them out. So Alan's got one of Jim's pianos, and I've got the other one. Sorry,
that's okay.
Interfere in your world, but
no, that was interesting. There were bits and pieces I didn't know about.
Yeah. People always used to reckon Jim was like a goat. You'd be driving up the road and you'd look across the corner. There's Jim coming. When you drive around 3 corners and come to that corner, never a Jim. Over the side and gone. He just didn't want to be found by people.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you another little story about Jim, just because I've got the chance. We've talked to you about the big swing bridge over the Whanakura, where Nians had the accident with their hoggets. Jim used to have to cross that, and after he'd got that far in, he got a horse. And his horse would wait up at the top of the road for a week or 10 days while Jim went to town. When Jim came back, he would Reg gambling with the taxi driver. Reg would drop him off, and he'd drop him 6 boxes of beer. So Jim would pack 3 there and 3 there, and he'd put one off here by him, and he'd sit on the other ones, and he'd drink that box, and then he'd take one off there and put the empty one out of the way. And when he'd done 5 or 6 days of sitting there drinking beer, he drunk his 6 dozen, and he was ready to go. And so he would just talk to the horse, and the horse would come back and pack up whatever else he had to go into where he was going. He had a pack saddle on the horse. Anyway, this one time he walked the horse down to the bridge, and the bridge was 400 feet above the water, so it was yay wide and a bloody long way down. So that was okay. The horse would walk across with him. This day, the front legs went through a board there, and the back legs went through a board there, and the horse was laying on his belly. And Jim, as quick as a flash, took his sports coat off, because he always went out looking proper, put his sports coat over the horse's head and told the horse to be calm, don't fight. And he went round the side and lifted the gear off the pack saddle and carried it off the bridge and found a board and brought it back, did the other side, and then frigged around and got the pack saddle off and carted it all off. By then he had 3 or 4 boards, so he'd lean on the old horse and push him over a bit and slide a board under, and do that at the back and then on the other side. And when he'd finished, he talked to the horse and took his coat off, and he said, "Come on, horse, you can stand up." And he did. He got that horse off that bridge and got him to safety. So he was a real good man with nature. Brilliant story in my mind.
Yes.
Yeah.